Hello and welcome to On Point. I'm Johnny Green. Sexual assault on college campuses has become a nationwide concern. President Obama's recent call to action seeks to raise awareness about rape on college campuses. A report prepared by the White House Council on Women and Girls says college students are particularly vulnerable. 1 in 5 women have been sexually assaulted while in college. The report goes on to say the dynamics of college life add to the problem because many victims are abused while they're drunk or under the influence of drugs, passed out, or otherwise incapacitated. In California, legislators have introduced a bill requiring colleges and universities to adopt uniform definitions of sexual assault and similar policies for reporting and preventing attacks. The proposal comes as several local schools, including Occidental College and USC, face federal investigations of their handling of alleged sexual assault. Unfortunately, the real number of assaults against women on college campuses is unknown because victims don't always report the crime to authorities. At CSUN, police say sexual assault crimes are more prevalent at the beginning of the school year among freshmen who are living on campus. The police department has a rape crisis advocate on staff, and officers are trained to handle sexual assault cases.
We have a specialized sexual assault investigator go out and start talking to the victim. We get a full and complete detailed summary of what happened. After that, then we take the victim over to the hospital where we get some evidence, some biological evidence via a sexual assault nurse who specialized in doing that, and then from there we provide counseling services, referrals, and victim advocacy and things like that to our victim.
Chief of Police Ann Glavin says college students are most vulnerable because they have the least amount of life experience. She says students must be careful of trusting too easily. Some female CSUN students say they are most concerned when the campus is dark.
I'm usually on campus 4 days a week at night, and I don't feel that safe. It's dark, but I usually try to have someone with me.
Most of the courses I've taken usually end at night, and I usually walk to my car by myself. So.
Oh, I've never seen or experienced any incidents at night, but I know of some that have happened in the dorm area.
So I'm on campus at night. Usually my classes end pretty late, like around 6:45. I have a Wednesday class that ends around 9:45. And yes, I feel pretty safe. I usually see people, asking me if I want to be escorted to my car or anything of that sort. So I feel pretty safe.
Usually it's just I'm trying to get from A to B quickly, and I don't have the time to pick up the phone and call Matador Patrol.
Probably if there was more parking available, because I park in the street, because usually I can't find parking in the structure. And perhaps if there was more parking available where it's a little nearer rather than walking 2 or 3 blocks, because that's how far I walk to get to my car. Probably that might make it a bit safer, at least from my perspective, yeah.
Here's On Point's Todd with more on the story.
Thank you, Johnny. I'm here with Maggie Stoicof from the Valley Trauma Center, who also works for Project Date, and Sari Lipsett from the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault. So now I'm going to ask the first question to you. What are some of the biggest contributions to sexual assault incidents on college campus?
Is it okay if I go first?
Go. Yes.
I think that a lot of times students come in, they're at a very vulnerable age, 18-ish, and they're exposed to a lot of things such as alcohol, drugs, maybe more lenience than they're used to, not living with their parents. And it all comes at them full force. And a lot of times the combination of that makes it hard for them to make decisions that they would normally make if not in that situation. So their entire world shifting and new things coming in contributes to a lot of that, I think.
I would also say living in a culture that is always putting, sexist messaging and being in an environment that it's a new environment, and they're trying to be, understanding of the world around them, and especially in college, there's a lot of relationships forming, and people are trying to figure out who they are, and again, living in a culture where you're constantly being pushed messages around, rape culture and, looking at the news and media that we're seeing, and a lot of not really understanding the impact it does have on young adults and people in general, not really getting the messages and how they're affecting people.
One study reports 1 in 5 college-age women sexually assaulted, but only 25% of those women felt they've been assaulted, and 2 out of 3 didn't consider the incident serious enough to report. What does this tell us about the stigma of sexual assault?
That it's one huge stigma, and what that means is there are a lot of things tied to that. People are scared that they are going to be stamped with a label and no one will respect them or look at them the same way. They'll be viewed as a weak person if they come forward and report the abuse that happened to them. And the truth of the matter is, the more people stay silent, it's almost like they're dying slowly inside as a result of the stigma that the rape culture, like you mentioned, continues to enforce.
Okay, and Sari, I'm going to ask you, do people provoke sexual assault by dressing provocatively?
So no, there's a huge myth out in communities and in society that it is about, she wouldn't have worn that, she wouldn't have gotten sexually assaulted. But we know, working in the field, that it's never, about what a person's wearing or what a person does or if they were drinking. It's all about that person taking power away from another person and violating them. And there's nothing that person could have done to prevent that. And if they were wearing, any kind of clothes, it could have still happened.
Are most sex crimes committed by strangers?
Interestingly enough, that is also a myth, that people believe that most sexual assaults are strangers, and so we have this idea of don't go in a dark alley, watch yourself, when you're in a parking lot. And the truth of the matter is, it's estimated that about 80% of sexual assaults that are reported are acquaintance rape, meaning that person knows the perpetrator in some way, whether it's a family member, a close friend, a boyfriend, or even someone that they had met a couple times at engagements or, parties. So that is not true. Most sexual assaults are committed by acquaintances.
It's funny that you said that, because we interviewed a CSUN student who describes her experience with sexual assault by someone she knew. The survivor says that they knew each other from long ago but reconnected through social media. We're going to play a few clips from her story, and I'd like to get your reaction afterwards. Let's play the first ones now.
Being lonely and young and stupid, we sent naked photos of ourselves to each other, which is now a bad idea. And just letting everybody know it's not a good idea to sext. So I told him, look, I don't want to do this. You need to leave me alone. I called my dad hysterically crying. I was upset. I was physically ill to the point where I was afraid to leave the room, the house or anything. So then I told him, yeah, we're not meeting up. You're harassing me. I'm going to call the cops. Well, he goes, well, if you don't do this, I'm going to put the pictures all online. I'm going to do this, this, and this. And I'm going my reputation, my job could be ruined eventually because I want to be a teacher. I just gave in because I was I didn't know what else to do. So he was, so we stopped at a liquor store. He got condoms and cigarettes. So he drives me home. I live off campus. I'm not going to say where because I don't want anybody to, if anybody knows him or he tries to come get me. But anyway, we pull off to the side road. He tells me to get back in his car, to get undressed and then just lay down, and then he just it's just, it's still vivid because it's recent still to me.
So you can start off with you.
Well, unfortunately, there are so many ways that somebody can lose consent. And clearly he was intimidating her, and she was coerced and forced to do this. It was not at her own will. So there was no consent, and that does constitute as rape, because that was taken away from her. And like you mentioned, a lot of times, and most of the times, rape itself is an act of violence and to assert the control over somebody else. It's not an act of sexual gratification as most people think it is. So in this sense, it's so unfortunate that she had that held over her head, so much so that she was worried about her reputation and not being able to have a job and what people would think of her, because that is what he fed her to believe. And that's so unfortunate that that happened to her.
Yeah, and I think just the bravery for her to talk about it, especially in a public space, and feeling willing to, tell the story, I think is really, it's really powerful to see someone be able to share their experience, and knowing that, that that she can be, supporting others by sharing her story is very powerful.
So traditionally, a lot of sexual consent is nonverbal, even though sexual assault can occur even if the victim didn't verbally object. How are students to distinguish nonverbal consent and someone objecting?
This is actually a great question, because there is legislation now in the works. Senator Kevin DeLeon's office has authored a bill that talks about affirmative consent, and that will create universal standards for consent for all schools and universities and higher institution schools in California. So schools will be hopefully adopting these affirmative consent standards, and there will be more universal standards throughout California.
I think that was a very good question, and I think that it's very ambiguous for a lot of people. So I can't always walk around answering questions. Sometimes they're just inherent and we know the answers. So how do we know what consent means if I'm not outright saying it? Well, a lot of what our peer educators for Project Date do is, when in doubt, so if there is no direct consent of yes, and when you say yes, it doesn't necessarily mean it's yes. Why? Because somebody could be forced to saying yes and their body could still say no. So consent means mind, body, soul completely. You want to be involved in that act with that person at that very moment. So we like to tell people that if they're going to engage in an activity where it could be a little bit ambiguous, then to side with caution and not do it if there's alcohol involved, until you can get the actual, yes, I want to be doing this with you right this moment, me and you or whoever is involved. Then side with caution and don't take that chance, because you don't want it to be a case where consent is lost.
I'm glad you said that, because we're going to listen to another piece of our interview with the assault survivor now.
The whole time we were in when I was in that situation, my body was there, but I was not, because I didn't want to do that.
So exactly kind of what I touched on. You can be forced, a threat, intimidation, fear, coercion. These are all things that perpetrators will use and employ to the survivors. And just because I say yes, it doesn't mean yes. My body has to say yes. My aura, everything about me has to want to participate in order for that to be consensual. So it's really important to say yes when you mean yes, and absolutely say no when you mean no when you can. But there are so many situations where that is not possible. So it's important to be very receptive of a person and always be mindful of somebody else too.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you just said, and having it be important to respect each other and respect just as a human, other people, and not ever pressuring anyone to or coerce them into something that they're not ready, they don't want to do. Yeah, I think that it's an important issue that needs to be talked about on campuses, and then I think campuses around the country are exploring more, and these affirmative consent standards, I think, will help even faculty, administrators understand a little bit more. It's not just the education for the students, it's education from everyone from the top down too, about what consent is and what it means.
So Maggie, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the long-term effects of sexual assault?
So for every situation and for every person, it is a unique experience. So it's hard for us to say that everybody who has been sexually abused in some way will experience the same effects. But we do know with the reported statistics that there are common effects that happen. For example, right now the statistics show that you are 33% more likely to be depressed. Your chances of contemplating suicide or even attempting suicide are higher. It shows a lot of times that people who have been abused in their past have a higher risk and chance of being sexually assaulted again in the future. So there are a lot of things that come into it, coping strategies that are negative. A lot of times people will express what they're feeling internally by cutting or, by doing self-harming behavior, drinking, insomnia. These are all effects that have happened to a lot of people who have experienced sexual abuse, but are not required, and it's not necessary that everyone experiences it the same way.
So let's listen to one more piece of that interview now.
I actually did go to the campus police, but after the way I was treated there, I was treated like, oh yeah, you wanted it, so you went and you got it.
I think that is sometimes a common, unfortunately, a common response that students sometimes get is either from, law enforcement or dean of students or administration, things that are not supportive and are not helpful to the survivor, and they get those responses. And so a very important piece is training law enforcement, student affairs, dean of students, all of the people that work on campus on how to effectively respond to a survivor, and looking at this through a survivor-centered lens and making sure that the survivor is feeling empowered to make their own decisions. So there does need to be training and effective response and protocol procedures so that, that survivors are feeling supported and looking that they can get resources and help in their healing process, as opposed to make them feel in any way not supported.
I agree with everything you said. I think it's heartbreaking to hear a response like that, and unfortunately I have had a lot of exposure working with law enforcement and survivors and seeing that kind of response in front of me. And the idea of sensitivity training shouldn't be an idea. It should be enforced from the top to the bottom of every agency, not only law enforcement, for everybody as a human being, because the truth of the matter is you can't blame someone when they don't understand what's happening. And without proper training, the law enforcement or even, lawyers and judges, etc., they can't connect with a human being when they don't understand what's happening. And that comes off as abrasive and horrible and insensitive, and that may not be the point that they're trying to make or even what they're feeling. It's the lack of training and understanding, and with understanding brings awareness and the ability to relate to someone, and in turn we can help survivors so that they don't have to have these horrible experiences where people deny them when they're finally building up the courage and the ability to speak out and ask for support.
And we've heard about that, in the news recently a lot, all over the nation, a lot of students coming forward and talking about their experiences with many systems on campus that have let them down in terms of response or the judicial affairs process. And so I think, it's important to note that the White House has now developed a special task force for campus sexual assaults, and they're working on, uniform practices and best practices that we can use nationally on campuses so that we can have these standards.
So do you think that's the reason why many people don't report the incident?
I think one of the most important factors that we need to take into account based on the statistics that we have, and we have to remember statistics are only based on what's been reported. So that could be true as far as applying to the population or not, because all of the things that are not reported weigh in a lot too. But from what we have reported, it says that 80% are acquaintance rapes of the abuse that happens. So what happens there if somebody in your family is doing the abuse? It makes it so much harder to come forward and report that, because there's the fear of disrupting the family and the family breaking apart. Sometimes it's the person who's providing the monetary support, and then what's going to happen if that person gets arrested or gets taken away. There are so many elements, and it's such a multifaceted situation that a lot of times it doesn't get reported because of those types of fears. And it's unfortunate, because there is help and there is support on all fronts for the people that do come forward. We just have to make it okay as a society to accept that and support that.
Yeah, we know there's a lot of barriers to reporting. So, hopefully through advocacy and legislation, we can break down some of those barriers so that it can be easier if a survivor wants to report, which is their decision, and they should feel empowered to make that decision if that's what they want, or not report, and that's also okay.
Absolutely.
What's the psychology of men who don't take no for an answer?
It's very hard to answer that specifically, because again, we only know what we have as far as what's been reported and the statistics shown. And some statistics say that the men who perpetrate have also been abused in their past. So it shows that they were victims too, and sometimes they assert the power and do the same thing by raping or by sexually assaulting, because that was the same power that was taken away from them when it happened to them. So there's some controversy there. Some statistics say that it's a huge number of people who have perpetrated were also abuse victims themselves in the past. And then there's others that say, no, these are just certain things that come out of people for whatever reason, whether it's their upbringing or whether it's a mental health condition that hasn't been taken care of or addressed, and then they go forward and become perpetrators. So there's really not one type of person or one kind of thing that happens out there that we can say, okay, that person right there, that's going to be a perpetrator.
Again, I think it goes into, power and, a culture that we live in that, can sometimes add these messages, that women are just, joking, or they don't really mean it, So I think there are those myths out there that can sometimes, make men, or whoever the perpetrator is, just, exert their power over another person. And I think it is part of, misogyny and living, there's still sexism today, and that is definitely a role to play in it.
And I think it's really important to mention too, you asked, what are some of the things that a man can have? And I think we're also perpetuating this sexism in a way too, because we're only looking at women. And the truth of the matter is, the more we only look at women, the more men will remain silent about their abuse too. So it's really important, and we teach this in Project 8, and it's something I really stand by. There are a lot of abuse victims that are male as well, whether it was perpetrated by another male or a woman. As we see in the local news, women are perpetrators as well to men. It's really important to be sensitive about how we frame things and how we look at things, whereas, yes, statistics show that it happens more to women. That doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't happen just as much to men. They may not be reporting it as much. So it's very important to remember that when we do go out there and speak on behalf of sexual abuse.
Correct. And my last question would be for you first, Maggie. Mm-hmm. What are the next steps that college campuses need to take to lower sexual assault on campus?
Well, I think the fact that they have peer education programs is a fantastic thing to start with, like we have Project 8. However, like I mentioned before, sensitivity training from the very, very top positions all the way down to the students is important. So whether that be we enforce the professors and all of the administration to get special training on what it means to have sexual assault happening, what would it look like, how would you respond to it if you see it? And from there, once everybody's kind of on board and has that understanding, we're going to be more able to help prevent it at that point.
I think we're very lucky. again with Senator Kevin DeLeon's office, authoring this bill, SB 967, that focuses partially on comprehensive prevention programs. So again, peer educator programs, women's self-empowerment programs, bystander intervention, primary prevention programming, and really using comprehensive prevention as a strategy, not just looking at one model, but really utilizing all of our tools and assets to work on prevention on college campuses. And looking at college campuses as different communities and different needs depending on school size, where they're located, non-traditional students, transfer students, international students, like really looking at the needs on campus and not just doing it for incoming freshmen, but really making it part of the education and awareness throughout college life. So I think we are really lucky to have these things in place now that we're looking at for California and then nationally with the White House Task Force, looking at national best practices for prevention as well as response and policies and procedures. And I think there will be more coming out soon about best practices. But I think we're in a really unique spot right now where it is being talked about and it is being addressed, and there is a focus on schools knowing their own communities and developing modules that work for them specifically.
Thank you so much for joining me, ladies. I really appreciate our talk.
Thank you for having us.
Michael Adams?
Here.
Michael Adams?
Here.
Michael Adams.
Michael Adams.
Students who miss 18 days of school in any grade risk falling behind and not graduating. Absences add up. Keep track at boostattendance.org today.
Come on, let's go.
Just a minute, I gotta finish this.
Wait, you're gonna post those pictures of Mary?
Yep. She thinks she's so hot.
But her mom and dad will see them. Her grandmother, her little sister, everyone she knows, it's gonna kill her.
Who cares? Just a couple of pictures. It's no big deal.
No big deal? Don't. This has gotta stop.
When you throw away money on wasted electricity, you're throwing away everything you could have bought with it. Saving energy saves you money.
Thank you for tuning in to On Point. Students who want more information about peer counseling should visit CSUN's website and search for Project Date. Our shows also appear on our website at CSUN TV News. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at CSUN On Point. And you can watch us on LA Channel 36 every Sunday morning at 11:30. From all of us here at On Point, I'm Johnny Green.